Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner. For those of you new to this channel, I know in the last few weeks we've had thousands of new subscribers, and again, thank you for that. I appreciate your support. I'm a constitutional attorney. I'm a member of the United States Supreme Court Bar. I'm a best-selling author of 6 books discussing, among other things, gun rights in America. And I'm proud to say that in 2021, federal judge Roger Benitez in California cited to my Second Amendment scholarship in striking down California's so-called assault weapon ban as being unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. And if you support the Second Amendment, I really would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. That would be really great. Today here at the Four Boxes Diner, I want to respond to a couple of comments that I keep getting on my Ukraine-related videos and why the story over in the Ukraine is so important to people here in the Second Amendment movement in the United States. Specifically, I want to talk about some of the comments that suggest that I am wrong to draw lessons from Ukraine's experience before and during the 2022 Russian invasion, and explaining why I think Second Amendment rights are so important here, not just in the United States, but all over the world. Let me tell you how I view this and why I think the Ukraine situation, while tragic, still has a lot of important lessons for supporters of the right to keep and bear arms around the world, including in the United States. In the last few weeks, I've done a series of videos about the lessons that Americans can learn from what's going on in Ukraine from the Russian invasion of that country. Specifically, what can people in the Second Amendment community learn from the importance of the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms from that invasion? Now, in the comments section to my videos, I've gotten a couple sort of general lines of attack against what I'm saying. Okay, the first goes like this. Hey, dummy, the reason why they need guns now in Ukraine is because they're at war. But we in the United States, we're not at war. We're not being invaded. There's no risk of invasion, so we don't need guns like they do. So it's not an apt analogy. On a related note, I also get a lot of criticisms of my views that goes a little bit like this. Hey, Mark, I don't think it is correct to use the unprecedented invasion by Russia of Ukraine as an argument for gun rights here in the United States. It's not analogous. Okay, well, I appreciate all comments. We don't need a safe space to live in here on the Four Boxes Diner, so we welcome comments and we want to address them. But I do think that those comments are a little bit misguided in the following way. There are many important lessons that we here in the Second Amendment community and in the United States can learn from the mistakes Ukraine made before the Russian invasion of their country. And I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn about why it's important to stay vigilant about our right to keep and bear arms for, among other things, preventing tyranny in all of its forms. So here's some of the reasons why I think that our view, or my view about the situation, the lessons in Ukraine are so important. I think the 2 biggest lessons are, first, it is never better to be disarmed as opposed to being armed, but then not needing the guns, okay? And relatedly, there's 2 sayings I really want you to remember. You may have heard them before. I use them all the time when I teach students and others about gun rights and the importance of staying protected. And here they are. There's a famous Roman saying that in Latin goes like this: Si vis pacem para bellum, which is Latin for, if you want peace, prepare for war. If you want peace, prepare for war. It's from the Romans. Or as Ronald Reagan taught us in the 1980s, peace through strength. And why is it? What does this mean? You see, it means that a person or even a society is far less likely to be attacked, right, than a defenseless society or person, which just attracts bad people to want to do bad things to people because they can get away from it, okay? And also, Leon Trotsky, okay, who is now dead, of course. He was a Russian Marxist revolutionary, Trotsky, a political theorist. He was a politician, and he had a great famous saying back in the day, and it goes like this: you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. And again, where was Trotsky born? Ukraine, believe it or not. So I think these sayings basically tell us that the human experience, which our founding fathers understood, was that there's always bad people out there who are willing to do bad things to good people if you give them an opportunity. And if you don't want bad people to do bad things to good people, then you need to prepare to confront them. You want to arm yourself. You want to protect yourself. You want to avoid bad people if you can. And by preparing to deal with an attack on yourself or your country, you actually minimize the risk of that attack on yourself or on the country. The second point I want to make is congratulations, America, and congratulations, Founding Fathers, for understanding the wisdom of the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms. You see, there's a famous saying by Bill Parcells, the former NFL coach, football coach for the New York Giants and the New England Patriots. What Bill Parcells is famous for saying, among other things, is you are what your record is. Now, what he means by this is that your record speaks to where you really are. Are you really good or not? Look at your record. And I would say that since the United States has not been invaded since, I guess, the War of 1812, since we haven't been invaded by a foreign power, for hundreds of years, set aside, specific attacks like 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. Okay. The reality is that we haven't been invaded, and we're probably not at a high risk of being invaded right now. But that's not a coincidence. That's not random. It's not luck, you see. The reason why the United States is unlikely to be invaded by a foreign invader is not because we are lucky. It's because we are prepared for an invasion. Our founding fathers at the start of the country helped prepare us to be safe from foreign invasion by ensuring and enshrining the pre-existing God-given right to keep and bear arms. And again, never forget this. The Second Amendment does not create any rights. Again, the Second Amendment does not create any rights. What the Second Amendment does is it recognizes rights that we all have as humans to self-defense and to be able to effectuate the means of self-defense. And in the modern era, of course, that means with, among other things, firearms. Now, the third lesson, I think, from the Russian invasion of Ukraine is I think the Ukrainians did not do a good job in preparing, right? They were slow to get off the dime, if you will. And they failed to learn a lesson that we here on this channel always talk about. And I've talked about it in my books. And that is this. You folks and I, we are our own first responders. It is a misnomer. It is wrong to say that police officers, that EMTs, that firefighters are first responders. It is not accurate. Okay? I know that's the label everyone gives them. Okay? And I support them. But it's not fair and correct to call them first responders. It's not true. The first responders in reality is you and me, because we're the ones that encounter the sick person, the criminal, or the fire first. And then we react to it by, among other things, perhaps calling 911, and then the firefighters or the police or the EMTs show up after we deal with it. We're the first responders. They are the second or the third responders. Okay? Now, the point here is that Ukraine and the government of Ukraine should have been following this channel, and they would have learned that lesson. Because what's going on now is Ukraine realized they are their own first responders. Sure, they're asking for help from others, but in my view, again, it's too late. Now, that's not to say that Ukraine's going to lose the war with Russia. I'm not saying that necessarily. But what I'm saying is, wouldn't it have been better if Ukraine and the politicians there had prepared for war ahead of time, recognizing that they were their own first responders and that they should not have been waiting and relying upon other countries for their protection? And we talked about this in one of our videos, which says that, at the time the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine actually had tons of weapons. They even had tactical nuclear weapons. That was in addition to all sorts of AK-47s and ammunition and conventional weapons and guns and all that stuff, small arms. They had all of it. And yet they wound up giving all of that up, in part because the U.S. government encouraged it and paid them to do so, among other things, right? But they gave it up. So basically, they didn't recognize, in my opinion, that Ukraine needed to be its own first responder. They needed to be independently self-reliant for their own national protection. And when they, in my view, did not do enough of that, to me, they became a much more attractive target for an invasion by Russia. Now, am I saying that had they done everything I'm suggesting, they would not have been invaded? I don't know, but I will tell you this. If Ukraine had tactical nuclear weapons, do we really think Russia would have invaded? I'm guessing maybe not. Ukraine should have learned from America's founders great wisdom in human experience in firearms and self-defense. In the Supreme Court case of Heller versus the District of Columbia, Justice Scalia wrote the majority opinion. You all know this. But what did Scalia talk about? He explained that, of course, to the militia, which is we the people, right? That's what the militia is. We've talked about that in other videos. I'll do another one to remind you how that works. But the militia in the text of the Second Amendment was understood to be necessary to the security of a free state. And by free state, he's not talking about like the state of Tennessee or something. He's talking about a state, a governmental entity, a sovereign state is what it's referring to in the Second Amendment. And here's the first reason, and I think this is very important, that Scalia writes in his opinion about one of the benefits of an armed citizenry in a country. He says, quote, it's useful in repelling invasions and suppressing insurrections. That's what he says. The Supreme Court of the United States in 2008, that the Second Amendment and having armed citizens is useful in repelling invasions and suppressing insurrections. And I'd say the Ukrainians have found out that arming citizens is pretty darn useful in repelling an invasion, that's what they're now trying to do. Now, continuing with the Heller decision, Scalia cites to Joseph Story, who I've also done a video about. Justice Scalia explains that Joseph Story explained that the militia is the natural defense of a free country, and what Joseph Story, who is really one of the greatest constitutional scholars in American history, writing about the meaning of the Second Amendment at the time it was really founded, right, in the 1791. A Story wrote, quote, the militia is the natural defense of a free country against sudden foreign invasions. Sound familiar? Sudden foreign invasions, domestic insurrections, and domestic usurpations of power by rulers. Again, the founding fathers of the United States actually contemplated armed citizens being a check and a deterrent against foreign invasions. It would have been nice if Ukraine had learned this lesson. And as I talked about in one of my earlier videos, they should have, because in 2013, Ukraine actually showed interest in America's Second Amendment at the very highest levels, in my opinion, of the legal society in Ukraine. And that's because in 2013, the prominent Ukraine Law Review reached out and had articles submitted by two of the most important Second Amendment scholars in the United States, Stephen Halbrook and Joyce Lee Malcolm, both of whom are cited by the United States Supreme Court on the meaning of the Second Amendment. And they both submitted articles explaining the importance of the Second Amendment to, among other things, thwarting tyranny. That was published in 2013 in the Ukraine Law Review. I'll put a link to these stories down below. Unfortunately, it seems to me that Ukraine did not learn from those scholarly pieces about the Second Amendment because they didn't adopt their own Second Amendment. And in my view, they'd have been much better off today if they had done so. And maybe they would have even been able to have thwarted that invasion of Russia this year. The other lesson I think Americans should learn about the Ukraine situation with Russia is that just because there's a low probability of a foreign invasion or some sort of domestic insurrection toppling the government or risking our civilization, this does not mean that you should not prepare for it just because it's a low probability. You see, the prospect of America being invaded is still indeed slim. I don't deny that. But the chances of our country being taken over with all of our citizens armed to the teeth to defend the country makes to me this idea a fantasy, a moot point. Okay? But to fantasize that evil forces in the world would not invade us and take over a country if there were no resistance is ignorance. And it doesn't speak to world history. For example, I have no doubt that Taiwan has recently raised its 0.01% probability to a lot higher over the last decade of a possibility of an invasion from China. And the number in the Ukraine is now 100%, right? They've been invaded. So again, I think that in the United States, while it's still slim that we're going to be invaded anytime soon, I think it may be slim because we have an armed citizenry. And as the apocryphal statement, it's unclear if this quote was ever made by Admiral Yamamoto at the start of World War II, There's a debate about this. It may just be apocryphal. It may not actually be a real quote, but it's still a great concept. And he said, this is Admiral Yamamoto supposedly said, that you could never invade the United States because there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. And I think that's true. I think that's true, although I'm not sure his quote is true. But I think the concept is accurate, that it would be very difficult to invade the United States. And if you did invade the United States, as Joseph Story taught us in his own writing in the early 19th century, even if someone were to successfully invade the United States, the ability of Americans to be able to fight asymmetrical guerrilla warfare using small arms would be highly likely. And again, Joseph Story, a Supreme Court justice, a famous Supreme Court justice, wrote that. That's not my opinion. That's actually from a Supreme Court justice in the early 19th century talking about the importance of the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms. Some people have commented that the Ukrainian invasion is unprecedented by Russia, but it's not. It's not at all, okay? First of all, Russia last annexed land from Ukraine violently within a decade or so ago, right? You've had these sort of civil wars on the eastern part of Ukraine for almost a decade, I think. And European history is basically nothing but invasions over and over again. Just think about it just off the top of your head. You had William the Conqueror in 1066 invading England. You had Vikings everywhere taking over all of Europe, okay? And attacking all of Europe and taking all sorts of things, okay? You had Moorish pirates who captured Italian slaves. There's the Romans invading Britannia. There are the Germans invading Poland and all sorts of other parts of Europe. This wasn't that long ago, folks. Basically, all of Europe is nothing more than one tribe or one nation invading another. So yes, it isn't happening right now, right, in the United States, but still, it's a serious possibility that you can have an invasion anywhere in the world because human history is largely invasion after invasion after invasion. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, and I'm saying it's imminent here in the United States. But to say that you shouldn't prepare for it, to me, is naive and means that we've not done a good job in teaching people world and American history. Remember, the use of firearms does not just thwart a potential foreign invader from attacking us, but it also thwarts domestic insurrections and domestic tyranny that can take over a country. Okay, countries have historically been known to sometimes go crazy, right? I mean, Germany, before World War II, was really, a very civilized, successful country. And certainly before World War I, where you had the Belle Epoch, okay? And yet Germany went crazy with all sorts of insanity and violence and terror. Now, no one, I think, would have predicted this kind of behavior, decades earlier. But then next thing you know, you get to the 1930s and the rise of the Nazi Party, and terrible, terrible things occurred from a people that most would have thought were civilized. Now, there's other examples of this. And again, I'm not suggesting it's going to happen here in the United States. But again, I want to learn from our history. Because here's a sort of a teaching point that I always like to emphasize. It's this. Smart people learn from the mistakes of other people, okay? Dumb people do not learn from their own mistakes. Smart people learn from the mistakes of other people. Dumb people don't learn from their own mistakes. I want the people that watch this channel to be smart. I want you to learn the lessons of history. I want you to learn the mistakes that other people make so you don't make them, okay? So you don't give up your right to keep and bear arms because you think it's a good idea, without understanding the history that went into why we have the Second Amendment right and why the founders enshrined it in the Second Amendment, not created it right. They didn't create the right to keep and bear arms. They recognized it in the Second Amendment. Now, with that said, going back to history, there are other examples of countries or people within countries that have gone crazy and done terrible things. For example, first, everyone talks to the Nazis, and that is a good but terrible example of something that can go wrong, where the German government literally killed millions of their own citizens and others. Okay, then you have like the craziness in China with the Chinese Red Guard. You had the killing fields of Cambodia. People forget the killing fields of Cambodia, where you had the Khmer Rouge, a Marxist group under Pol Pot, that basically started systematically, killing people that they thought were not supportive to the Khmer Rouge, to the Marxist movement in Cambodia. Okay, all these social movements, started off as one thing, and next thing you know, they start killing people unexpectedly. So it does happen in history. There's a very important historian named R.J. Rummel who actually did the math showing that in the 20th century, approximately 200 million people were killed by governments. And I'm not talking about the Japanese government killing Americans at Pearl Harbor or Americans killing Japanese in World War II or any of that. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about governments killing their own people, whether it be the Stalin purges in Russia, what the Nazis did in Germany, what Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge did in Cambodia. And he has an entire list. So again, if you ever want to look at the breakdown of what governments can do in terms of tyrannical governments can do in terms of evil and killing and murderous conduct, then you would be hard-pressed to find a better person to study than the historian R.J. Rummel. And I will link to his work down below so you can check it out yourself. To wrap up, I believe that there are many lessons for the Second Amendment community to learn from the experience of the Russians invading Ukraine and Ukraine's, in my opinion, failure to properly prepare for this possibility because they did not robustly adopt some form of a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms and ensure that all their people were robustly armed and were a bustling, thriving, robust gun culture like we have here in the United States. And I think these lessons, there's a lot of people out there that don't like guns that I am sure are going to start writing articles trying to discourage these comparisons between what's going on with the Russian attack on Ukraine and its people with the Second Amendment community in the United States. Because I think it's clear to anyone that's a student of history that's watching what's going on over there in Europe that you are your own first responder. You have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And one of the best ways to prepare for the worst and hope for the best is to make sure at a micro level, you and your family are armed or at least have a plan to deal with violent thugs, criminals, natural disasters, and whatnot. And at a macro level, meaning international level or at a national level, your people are prepared, the law-abiding people are prepared to be able to defend themselves against natural disasters or attacks by criminals or terrorist attacks or foreign invaders or domestic insurrections or what have you, because we are still human. We still live on planet Earth. There is still evil among us, whether we like it or not. And sticking your head in the sand and pretending it ain't going to happen is not a strategy. It's not a plan. And remember, just a couple months ago, people were in Ukraine enjoying coffee, going out to the park, having a great time, living their lives, and now they're at war. And maybe they weren't properly prepared because now they're handing out guns to private citizens and ammunition to private citizens and trying to develop an army and all these other things that they probably needed to do many, many years earlier to discourage the Russians from invading in the first place. And again, my final point is this, that one wonders whether or not if Ukraine adopted a Second Amendment and made sure that they had a gun culture like we have here in the United States, would the Russians have actually invaded Ukraine in the first place if the Ukrainians were armed? And I'm not even talking about if they had their tactical nuclear weapons that they had at one point. I'm talking about if they were just armed to the teeth with armed civilians. Would the Russians have still invaded that country? We will never know for sure. But one thing is for sure, the Ukrainians today have realized the importance of arming their citizens. Is it too little, too late? Only time will tell, and we'll be watching the story carefully. Okay, well, we'll see you next time here at the Four Boxes Diner, and thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.
Orders up. Table 2A.